So I'm here with David Robson at the fantastic Ashtanga venue, Purple Valley, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Stu.
Hi. And so what I want to talk to you today about is tradition versus non-tradition in the practice, mostly, and then secondary things revolving around vinyasa and that type of thing. And so what I want to say first was, I'm right in thinking that you would consider yourself a traditional teacher or more traditional teacher.
I try to be.
So what does that represent to you, that quality?
For me, traditional just means that I'm passing on what my teacher has taught me. And in some ways, it's verbatim. I'm passing on the instructions as clearly as I've understood him giving them to me, and trying not to add in my own interpretations, especially if they're going to change that teaching.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm always trying to operate within the lines or the boundaries of the information as it's been given to me.
And your teacher has been Sharat from the word go?
That's right, yeah. So from my first trip to Mysore, 2002, I've always studied with Sharat. And so at first it was, a small affair.
Yes.
After he would finish with Guruji, he would teach in his mom's house. And there'd be like 10 or 12 people.
Nice.
And then a few years later, once Guruji wasn't teaching as much, Sharat took over at the Shala, and so he moved everybody there. But yes, Sharat's always been my teacher.
And how do you feel, has that made a difference to your approach from those people that came up through with Guruji?
Yeah, I can't say anything. I don't know about what their experience was with Guruji. Just from what I hear, I think my experience would have been very similar to people that were studying at the main Shala too. I don't think Sharat's ever been teaching anything different than how Guruji was teaching, but I think the way that Guruji probably finished teaching in the 2000s was different than the way he, was teaching in the 70s or the 80s.
Yeah.
And it changed over time as it grew more popular.
And for yourself, what are the key qualities the key qualities really for sticking to that traditional approach rather than veering off and adding bits in or making modifications to the practice?
Well, foremost is that I don't really know anything.
Do any of us, even if you think we do.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I try to keep that in mind all the time. And so I'm more of a technician. I'm just passing on a technique that's, been taught to me, and that's limited by my understanding of it. And so I'm passing that on as best as I can. My interpretations of it aren't very interesting. They're not, there's nothing that makes me worth listening to in terms of my interpretations of the technique. It's the technique that's come down over, millennia.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about yoga either. I know about these techniques in the hopes of achieving yoga, but I don't have any real deep realization or understanding of yoga. I'm just like everybody else, working towards it. Yeah.
But when I'm talking to you, I feel that you've got quite an understanding of the body and of anatomy and how things work. Do you ever find conflicts with certain postures or certain sequences in your own mind, but how do you juggle with those inconsistencies maybe? Or are there any inconsistencies?
Well, the way that I've been taught by Sharat, if you've taken classes with Sharat, then there's not that much being passed on in terms of anatomy.
Yeah.
He'll say, straighten your leg or put your hand here or, inhale, jump. But there's not going to be anything about, he's never going to say like soften your psoas or,
yes.
or internally rotate. I've never heard the word rotate. Those things we bring, I think, as we, that's our language. And we bring that in to the teaching as it's been given to us. And I try to use that to understand the teaching that I've been given. So I use it to support the teaching. It doesn't, as far as I can tell, it doesn't really go against it. When I don't understand something in terms of an instruction, if it comes up against my understanding of anatomy, usually what I'll do is try to reapproach my understanding of the instruction. So sometimes I've just misunderstood.
Yeah.
But so much of anatomy is actually opinion.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Functional anatomy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it differs all the time,
Yeah.
no matter what you read or even when you explore stuff. Sometimes you figure out that what you thought originally was complete rubbish.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a bunch of ways to do things.
Yeah.
The same thing.
Yeah.
And they might work, all of those different approaches.
Yeah.
Kind of like the practice too. So kind of like traditional and non-traditional.
Yes.
There's lots of valid techniques. It's just choosing one.
And what are the key features, would you say, that sort of, are there certain elements that you see as very to the core of keeping that traditional technique?
Mm-hmm.
Certain things that crop to mind that are the center threads going through it?
Yeah, for me, it's the idea is that it's a moving meditation. So the vinyasa count's very important.
Yeah.
And the idea that following tradition or following teaching is what reveals our tendencies. You know, so we start to see our aversions and our attachments through the technique. And because the technique doesn't have an agenda, or at least it doesn't care about our personal agenda,
Yeah.
then we can get underneath our own psychology in the practice. So I try to stick with that as much as I can. So, you know, again, when it comes up against my knowledge, I figure that it's my knowledge that's what I'm trying to subvert using the technique in a way. I don't try to twist the teaching in order to
fit in.
Fit my opinion.
I suppose some of the things that I think about is maybe, for instance, Trikonasana and holding the big toe in Trikonasana.
Yeah.
It's sort of a very traditional thing.
Yeah.
And yet I look at it, particularly with beginners, and I see this shape that to me is like horrible.
Yeah.
And I think, how is that good? Couldn't that just be tweaked a little? I mean,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What is your approach to that? Do you get the students to always hold their big toe, or?
I do.
Okay.
The way I understand it is that there's conditions of the posture. So there's certain characteristics of Trikonasana that make it Trikonasana.
Yeah.
And one of them is holding the toe. You know, the other one, say the other arm is stretched straight up.
Yeah.
The drishti is the hand. The feet are X distance apart, 3 feet.
Yeah.
And so those conditions have to be met in this system for it to be called Trikonasana.
Yeah.
And then everything that needs to happen in order for those conditions to be met is going to be different according to each person.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I can see people don't like it because it's not sort of fitting lines.
Yeah.
You know, like the lines that we might consider healthy or even attractive.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't look good.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, that it seems like a very different approach in some ways. It's not like it's not an Iyengar approach, right?
No.
You know, it's different. There's more of an emphasis on connections. So it seems like holding the big toe, it's like a mudra. It's almost like a seal.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely for sure feels different, and
Yeah.
it feels probably better in
Yeah.
some ways, but it's just, I'm wondering, you know, whether that's like a step that could be achieved a little bit later, or once we've opened up a bit, or whether it has to be there right at the beginning.
Well, that's the crux of it. So this is coming at it from the toe, and then you'll work towards straightening the leg and getting the torso more parallel to the floor, as opposed to maybe using a block or putting the hand on the shin, starting with the leg straight and the torso parallel, and then working at the flexibility to get the big toe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, both are going to end up in the same place. It's just where you're starting from. But again, I was always taught, you know, catch your big toe.
Yeah.
That was never...
That's a fundamental.
I never heard my teacher say, if you can't reach your big toe, then put your hand on your shin.
No.
So then that's what I teach as well.
Yeah, so you're sticking true to everything that comes through.
Yeah, as close as I can, as well as I can understand it. I'm sure Sharat would have criticisms
Of what you were doing, what you were saying.
of my limited understanding. Yeah.
So, I mean, we have... obviously, there's a massive, still a massive interest in the traditional approach. I mean, you've got one of the biggest, or not? Is it the second biggest after Mysore program?
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody like documents their,
But
you know,
there's a
their
lot
numbers
of
so much. But we
students,
have like 140, 120 each day, and as far as I know, that's one of the bigger communities in the world.
So it means, you know, there's plenty of people that believe in that approach, obviously, and it's still very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there was also a movement towards a little bit less traditional, shall we say, and trying to accommodate potentially people's differences.
Mm-hmm.
where do you feel? I mean, I know I'm not asking you maybe to voice an opinion against that sort of approach, but just where do you feel that is coming from? That, and maybe what are the pitfalls of going down that route without being specific, shall we say?
Well, I understand. I mean, everyone's doing what they think is good.
Yeah.
And right. But I think a lot of the time when people hear something like "stop at this pose," it seems punitive.
Yeah.
It's saying like if you can't achieve that, you don't get to do anything else.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to me in a lot of ways in safety. Certain parts of the body have to open up before we can go on to other postures, and it's not right from the beginning obvious about what can be dangerous. So rounding the back. A lot of the poses that come in the second half of primary series, unless the hamstrings have stretched out and the hips have opened, they're going to really round your back quite a bit, even though you might be able to achieve them. But they seem accessible, much more accessible than something like Marachasana D.
Yeah.
But I think Marachasana D serves a purpose, assuming that the knee is healthy and that it's just a matter of the hip having to open up. Then I think that opening has to take place or should take place before you try these other postures, which could compromise your back and lead to a much deeper, problem.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. And I do think the tradition is inclusive. I think everyone is subject to those rules, you know, and sure, you're going to get some people that are naturally healthy and flexible that'll zip through the series, and then other people that are going to have a hard time with it. And that's going to make a difference if you start measuring your progress in the practice by your progress in asana.
Yes.
But I don't think that's the point of it. And I think that's where the main difference in approaches are. I'm not trying to belittle anybody.
Yeah.
But I think people that are really devoted to the tradition tend to want to go beyond the asana. They want to use the asana as the object of meditation, but what they're looking to is to develop a meditation practice.
And there's certain key postures, core postures, gatekeepers in the primary series, and then in fact all of the series, I imagine.
Yeah.
So we've got Marachasana D and Baddha-Konasana.
Yeah, Supta Karmasana, Bhujapadasana.
Yeah.
Yeah, ones that you kind of have to get before you're allowed to move past them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bhujapadasana isn't always sort of listed under those cores.
Yeah, I don't know if those are like official. I think that's like a Western kind of interpretation, but yeah.
So how would it go like when you were practicing with Sharat then? Would it have been whatever asana you got to, was there any fudging of the lines? Was it, okay, that's an acceptable level in the posture?
Yeah.
I can get you in, I can assist you in, or how did it run? Or was there certain ones, okay, look, you've got to be able to do that on your own?
Yeah. Well, certainly if you can be assisted into it, it counts.
Okay.
Because your body's capable of doing it, and you're going to be able to do it on your own in time for most poses.
Yeah.
And there's always a little bit, everybody's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So he's always, it seemed to me that everybody's being treated slightly different according to, age and ability and history and things like that. So, but, pretty much everybody is stopping at D, Marachasana D, or Navasana, say half primary, until the hips open up enough that they can do that. If someone's got like a really messed up knee and it's been whatever, the meniscus has been cut away and it's never really gonna close well again, then he seems to let that that's a different issue, right? And so he's not gonna say wait for your knee to get miraculously healed, and so you'll move past them.
Okay, some common sense is used.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's there's still a lot of room for personalizing the practice, inside of it.
So taking on, because we are so vastly different, aren't we? When you look at people practicing yoga, they can be big guys that you might see on an American football field, down to like bantamweight boxer shapes, wiry, thin, and the ability to actually get into certain postures will, for sure, has to be influenced by our physicality. Yeah. So how do we accommodate that within a more linear structure?
Well, I think, I approached this practice initially from a non-traditional perspective.
Okay.
That was the only kind of route in that I had in Toronto.
So what did you do specifically?
Well, I wasn't held at poses. I wasn't really instructed, you have to do this pose in this order and things like that. But it was still called Ashtanga.
Yeah.
And there was props and things like that. And then I, from coming to Mysore and studying with Shrat, I became more and more convinced of the efficacy, of the
that it worked.
the power of the traditional approach. And what I saw is that it seems more optimistic in some ways. Like, I was told from a non-traditional perspective that some bodies just aren't going to be able to do this.
Right.
And then when I would see Shrat teaching, I would hear him say, you can do this to everybody.
Yeah.
You can do this. Wait, work, focus, keep doing it. Do it every day and it'll come. And I had that experience again and again where poses that I was told that my body type didn't do.
Because you're meaty, aren't you? You're not thin and wiry. There's some stuff to you. So I can imagine it would get in the way on some certain things.
Yeah, certain poses are hard. Yeah, I've just got a normal body.
Yeah.
Like, it's work.
Yeah.
But, so I still feel, I'm still sort of slowly climbing, I still feel changes coming.
Yeah.
And I feel them coming because I don't give up or I don't skip, the posture. I don't settle.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, well, I'll never do this. So it's kind of pessimistic, I think, to say, well, your body just isn't suited to do this pose. Seems like everything can change.
And it does, for sure. And sometimes it's a mental thing, isn't it, that needs to change in your head. And sometimes a bit of letting go and not so much pushing, and then all of a sudden it's changing.
It's just super frustrating, right?
Yeah.
To get stuck at something.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be there. Like, we don't want to have to face up to that in the practice day after day. But it's almost like that has to be digested. You have to take that in and let that kind of burn through you. And that's change, that's what brings on, you're willing to accept it and then work inside of it instead of just letting that, whatever that is, that frustration or that place that you don't go, it just sits there inside of you, and so it never changes. You just avoid it.
I suppose I've come from an exercise background before the asana yoga, and if I was to go into the gym and do the same thing every day for X number of years, you would be aware that you were building up imbalances within the body. If you did always the same bench press and you didn't change the angle or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how much of that applies to the asana. If you repeat the same set of asana over and over again without the ability to progress through to other series and give your body a change, if you sort of plateau and get stuck, whether that is a potential drawback. How do you see that? I mean, you have to come across students that have suddenly got stuck on a particular posture for maybe potentially many years.
Yeah. I've got people that have done half primary for 5 years. Yeah.
For sure.
They're whatever. There's a lot of karma in there. Well, I think, from an exercise approach, I don't know that it's the most intelligent sequence. I don't think it is exercise. Again, I think it's a moving meditation, and I think everything that comes up, even the frustration that might come or the questions that might come up from doing the same thing every day and wondering about that, is fuel for the fire. And that you might want to do another exercise routine later in the day if that's your goal. I think this is, it's like anything. It could be mantra or anything that you're using as your object of meditation. It's what you'll do in the morning or whenever you do it at the same time every day, specifically to achieve peace of mind. And the physical component of it, exercise, is really secondary. I know that's odd. I know.
Well, no, I really appreciate what you're saying, which is so true.
Yeah.
But also, there's an expectation of change in the physical body, isn't there? That our hips would become more open or our shoulders become more open, that then allows us to progress through the asana, potentially through the series.
Yeah.
The idea being potentially that why are these other series there if we don't need them?
Well, I think they're just there for absorption. I think they're only there so that there's always something for you to go to. There's always your own sort of failure or shortcomings are built into the practice, right? The ideal of it.
Yes.
And so that's allowed to play out. You can go into it as much as you want. And so for those people that are going to do that physical side of it, they'll just keep going and going. And it'll require maybe deeper levels of commitment, but maybe not too. If someone's got a lot of natural ability, I mean, no one's feeling more sensation in Bharavasana than they are in Janushirshasana if Janushirshasana is really hard for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we've all got a certain threshold, and we all feel that same
Yes.
sort of range of pain or suffering or whatever. So I just think those poses are there to catch everybody.
And to challenge us, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like that we're doing it correctly if we do them all.
Right.
And Guruji said, intermediate's for teachers and third series, or advanced is for demonstration only, right?
Right. Okay.
Primary series is enough.
For the bulk of everybody.
Yeah, and also we're all gonna end up not being able to do the poses. Does that mean that we don't have deep practices? And if we practice for 40 years and then we start getting stiff, as we age, then we're still gonna have this like laser sharp concentration at that point, but we're not gonna have the physical abilities. We're gonna have to let go.
So how can we develop that more meditational concepts within the physical practice, within the asana practice?
Yeah, I think that's the vinyasa count, the idea of following the count as closely as we can. And, doing the practice, which is keeping our attention on the breath and making our body move in the the conditions of the postures and the conditions of the vinyasa. And then also, putting as much effort as we can into each of the movements, or as much attention as we can into each breath, and letting go as well as soon as we move on to the next breath. So I think vinyasa really has all of that packaged inside of it,
And I know we've talked about the synchronicity of breath and movement, and I talked to you about this off camera, and I was thinking, when you said to me, I thought, yes, okay, I know that bit. And I'm being honest here. But then I watched your video, Learn to Float.
Yeah.
And it was like, I really like it. It's so much technical detail, and it's like
thanks.
fantastic. And suddenly the penny dropped. And I thought, I've always been changing my breath to suit the amount of movement.
Yeah. Movement follows breath.
Exactly. It's synchronized, but it's not synchronized in the way that we were talking about, which was the breath being the same metered approach, and then changing the movement to meet that.
Yeah.
And it's taken me this long for the penny to drop. So that's perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit. I thought that was really and you used the drum beat to give that meter.
Yeah, which is, a convenient prop, right?
Yeah.
And it's, okay, so the idea is that movement follows breath, not breath follows movement. And so, whenever I say that, people are always like,
It doesn't really drop, does it? I think, we're doing that.
It's a really difficult thing to do, actually. And so I always say, to make that happen, we say the beginning of the movement happens at the beginning of the breath. And then we try to time whatever movement it is out over the duration of the breath, so it doesn't end until the end of the breath.
Yeah.
And that technique makes us keep coming back to the breath and keep coming back to the movement. So we can't go on autopilot. Ekam, inhale, arms up. You have to keep synchronizing your movement so that you can time it, to when the end of the breath is. Now, the breath is going to change, because it's aerobic. As you go through the practice, your heartbeat and your breath speed up. Yeah. But as close as you can, you're trying to keep your breath stable so that you can keep your mind nice and calm.
Because there's a big difference then between the amount of movement for up dog or the amount of movement to get up into warrior in the B.
Exactly, yeah. So you've got to really speed up or slow. It's like changing gears, that's what I always say. And what happens usually, say, in Surya Namaskar B, when you're doing something like lifting up into warrior one and then coming all the way back down to chaturanga, is that we carry the momentum into the next vinyasa.
Yes.
And so that's, in a way, that's us getting carried away, right? We're not really just being with the breath and being with the movement. We're being sort of carried into the routine of it, into this, instead of slowing down and trying to time it out again. Yeah. And I mean, it seems a little facile, like it seems like a simple idea, but when you watch the difference of when you watch people trying to do it, you can see such a huge difference in in the energy of their movements, in the energy of their practice.
Yeah, it felt very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first time I've always tried to actually consciously link the breath and movement. The first time I've tried to meter it the whole way.
Did you use the drum beat?
I used, I'm
Yeah.
afraid I ripped your A and B and had it in earphones so that I could just do that bit.
Yeah.
And then I tried to keep the breath for the rest of the
Yeah, it's very
sequence.
hard. Yeah.
And it was nice. And as you say, there's points there where the intensity of the posture is going to want to influence the breath potentially. So we're trying to take ourselves back to that meter that we set in the A's and B's.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I mean,
as much as we can.
Yeah, it's organic, right?
Yeah.
So the sort of math of the 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not realistic, I think, in the practice, but as much as possible. And you can see the really advanced practitioners, they're able to keep a steady breath,
Keep that going.
even when they're doing very difficult things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, like, I've watched your floating. It's just like, seems weightless, even though I teased you a little bit before you come on camera because I know you've just eaten lunch.
Yeah.
But, okay, so I get you to do some floating and see how you can do it now.
Yeah.
So you're saying you still feel that you're rooted to the ground and not as light as it looks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it still works.
It still works.
Yeah.
Sorry, what I was going to say to you was, when you say you jump through for, say, Ardha Baddha Padma Paschimottanasana, and you've got your floating jump, but you've also got a fairly intricate posture to get into. You've got some movement around the hip, you've got some movement around the arm to bind into it.
Yeah.
That's a lot to do
On an inhale.
in one inhale of,
Yeah.
of a similar count as your starting vinyasa.
Yeah.
How do you
Well,
do that?
it's possible.
Okay.
It's a lot to do, but it is possible. What it means is that you can't. Well, you can't put too much of an emphasis on your float.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
How many breaths can we have for the float and how many for getting
Well,
it?
that's why Strata is always saying no handstands.
Yes.
You know? And
Yes,
so
yes.
the floating it's a quality that is coming into the practice. Like we were talking movement and breath. But it's not like the you can see it when people are jumping, but that's not really what a float is. And so if we're just making it about putting in this like nice fancy or beautiful handstand and we're taking an extra breath and we're adding that in, then you're kind of defeating the purpose of the vinyasa count, right? That you've suddenly made it about performance.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to let go of your own ability or what you think might be a good move or so. Yeah.
Flourish. Because I know you talk
Flourish,
about flourishes
exactly,
as well.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of some other flourishes that people do?
Well, those are the flourishes that we do. It's all in a good heart, but it's usually because part of us we're kind of reveling in our ability.
Yeah.
And so we'll jump up into the handstand and then slowly come through. But if you listen, a lot of the time that's an inhale up and then an exhale down and an inhale to set up and then an exhale. So there's a whole extra breath being put in there. Why?
To give us time for the flourish.
Yeah, for the flourish, yeah. And then, so those are the conscious ones. More often it's unconscious. So, and usually it has a lot to do, well, it's either what we've been taught somewhere along the line. Someone maybe was trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
So, Surya Namaskar B, bending the knees and brushing your hands on the floor.
Yeah. I do that.
Yeah,
I
that's
used
the
to
big
do
one.
it until I watched the video.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I do that.
Yeah. And so someone said, bend your knees enough that you can touch the floor at some point, probably early on in our journey.
Yeah.
And that became, the condition.
Yeah.
But that's not actually part of it. So I always say, make your vinyasas a straight line, as in the quickest sort of way between point A and point B is a straight line. Get rid of all the little side trips.
Yeah.
So your hands don't need to brush the floor to go from Samastiti to Utkatasana.
Yeah.
They just lift straight up.
Yeah.
Or
The swan dive.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, the arms out to the side. I mean, that can get pretty elaborate.
Yeah.
Or the swinging the arms back. I think that's more,
Momentum.
Yeah, we use less energy to do that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff where we do that. We swing the arms out before we lift them out to the side. And,
Yeah.
and that's our body kind of trying to do us a favor because we're doing it repeatedly.
Yeah.
And our body starts to say, okay, well, if you're going to keep doing this, let me take over.
I'll find a cheat.
Yeah, I'll find a way that you don't have to burn as many calories, right?
Yeah.
Or use as much energy or think about it, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. We want to make everything filled with intention. So you want to get rid of all those unconscious little habits of movement as much as possible. But that's so hard. You know, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
I see myself on film sometimes, you know, doing the practice, and I'm like, what am I doing?
I should know better.
Yeah, it gets very, you know, just they come up again and again. You
Yeah.
can't clear them,
Yeah.
and then sort of, okay, it's clear. Now I have a practice without
Yeah.
these unconscious movements. They all just start creeping back in again. Yeah, so it just constant vigilance.
So it does add another level of focus, doesn't it?
Exactly,
It's
yeah.
quite cool because it gives you, okay, yeah, we've got to be mindful of this stuff that we want to
Yeah.
sort of bring in.
Yeah, and it's just about being more and more present with each movement, and which is particularly hard when they're repetitive movements. You know, you got to keep coming back to it.
Yes, yes.
And so that's, to me, that focusing technique, coming back again and again, is how we might get to meditation. And that can be done doing primary series, you know, or third series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the meditation, it's an easy thing to say, isn't it? A moving meditation.
Yeah.
But what does it feel like? Maybe even that's
I don't
too
know.
hard. And what is it?
Yeah.
You know, how do we know when we're doing it and not doing something that we think we're doing that
Yeah.
seems like it?
Well,
That makes any
I'd say if
sense?
we have that question, then we're probably not doing it.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I'm not speaking like, I'm not a master of meditation. I'm just, like I said, a technician. You know, I'm passing on this technique. So I think I'm still at the focusing stage, you know, and every once in a while I'm blessed with moments, but I think we all are. I don't think I'm different in that way. And they're not always just on the mat during sadhana, they're through the day. But I think it's unitive. It feels just like you're very present and peaceful. You know, and it's a direct experience of things, and there's less words, there's less thinking happening. You're just able to kind of appreciate being where you are.
And how does your experience, say, of the primary series when you were doing it, say, 20 years ago, to the qualities of how many days? Am I overestimating?
Yeah.
I think I'm just in the gateway, aren't I? Maybe I've aged you a little
Yeah.
bit. To as you do it now, the quality of the things that you think you've added to it, shall we say, or that really made a difference.
Well, I think I've been practicing since about 2008,
Okay.
so that's not that long.
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah.
And as it's been a long road. I'd say the first 10 years are you know. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not good at talking to you about what meditation is because I don't feel like I'm qualified to say what those states of mind are. That's what I rely on the Yoga Sutras or Shrat for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're working towards it still.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just working towards focusing, doing my duty.
So if I go back to the breath then, the breath and movement, for those people that, you know, let's pick one of those core postures that's hard for people to get into potentially. So like Marichyasana D. And there's, you know, it's going to be a struggle for a lot of people to get in that same inhale, jump through breath.
Mm-hmm.
How can they, so they're going to need another breath.
Mm-hmm.
How can
At
they
least
add it
one.
in, at least one?
Yeah.
How can they add it in?
And a towel.
In a mindful way, or a way that it incorporates certain movements with, because when you're moving around several joints within one breath, how do we, because it seems quite, with the Surya Namaskars, it seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? It's one movement, one breath, near enough.
Yeah.
But once we're moving around different joints within the same breath, there's a tendency to sort of fluff the breath up or drag it out.
You and I have similar body types.
Yeah.
And so you pick that pose because we can both kind of
appreciate that.
Yeah. But I have a lot of students. My wife can go into Marichyasana D on a breath like that. Yeah.
Right.
And her body type lets her do that as well as her ability. She's got a great practice. So, but so for her that's not an issue. It's hard for us to imagine, right? But there's other things that are hard for her that might be easy for us.
Yeah.
But I think it's just about the ideal of it. Yeah. So this is the ideal. Sapta, inhale, jump through, and you're in Marichyasana D. Yeah. And then the reality of is it for you and me, is that no, Sapta, inhale, we jump through, and we're still bending the knee. If if I eat light for a while and it's a particularly good day, I might get close to doing it. But usually I'm going to have to take an extra breath.
Okay.
What do I do when I take the extra breath?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I just come back to the vinyasa as quickly as I can. I come back, I try to let go of, whatever, thoughts are going through my head. Maybe it's frustration, or usually it's distraction. As soon as you break with being able to achieve the ideal of it, then you get distracted and you start thinking of other things. It's an opening. Yeah. And so I just try to get back on to focusing as quickly as possible. And to me, losing it is as much a part of the technique as being able to maintain it.
Yeah. Because
everybody's going to find some part of the practice they can't do.
Yeah.
And if they can do all of, primary on the, And so they're going to get to a point where they can't maintain the vinyasa anymore. They'll come up against the impossibility of the ideal and the limitations of their own, whatever, focus, body, whatever. Yeah. And then what? And so that's where we're starting to cultivate non-attachment and equanimity. And it's not, that's an impossible thing just to say, okay, I'm going to be equanimous. What does that mean, Or usually it just means you're going to suppress anger, or pretend to be calm. Yeah. But that vinyasa technique says, you don't have to pretend anything. You can think whatever you want, but as quickly as you can, go back to doing this technique. Get back on track and let go. Yeah. You actually have to physically let go of everything else to get to the next thing. So I can be struggling to get into D, and I could start mopping my face, and I do sometimes. It overcomes me, but I know what the count is, and so I try to get back onto it, and I pick it up again as best I can. And actually trying to do that all the time does make it easier to start to get it. You get closer to it.
And it's a certain movements that go together. So say we're adding this extra breath in for any one of these things. Mm-hmm. Is it still good to think, okay, I'll be wrapping on the exhale and I'll try and get in on the inhale, or just do what you can?
I think as quickly as we can, we'd want to get back onto the correct vinyasa. Yeah. So I think, for Chastity, it's Sapta, we're in the pose. Yeah. Yeah. Usually I would say it's on the exhale that most of us get into the full expression of it, with the extra breath even. So. Yeah. Yeah. And then you start counting once you're in. Yeah. So you just get back on track, and you try to make the breath that you come on to track the correct breath. So you need to know the count too eventually. Yeah. You don't need to know the technique to be able to do it.
Because it's not as straightforward as it seems, is it?
No.
There's some where we've got like Paschimottanasana, we've got that lift, don't we? And then we fold forward. And then is it Janu C where you're just straight in, aren't you?
There's
not Janu C, Marichasana C.
Yeah, Marichasana C and D, it's Sapta straight in. So for, from Ardha Baddha Padma Paschimottanasana all the way up to Marichasana B, there's these, Sapta inhale, you jump and you set up, Ashtau exhale, you're in. Yeah. But then coming out of it, there's an uncounted breath. Yeah. So there's no movement on that breath.
So you lift and hold.
Yeah. So it all becomes very formal the way it's done. And so if you don't know it, there's no reason that you would do it. Yeah. There's no reason you would take a breath and be totally still. Yeah. But that's part of the count. And when you start to integrate it, it does focus your mind that way. So you need to learn the count.
And is that one of the purposes you see for the Friday led class, that type of thing?
That's right.
To learn the count, learn the sequence.
But I listened to that count for 5 years without learning it. It's amazing.
You filter it out, don't you?
Yeah.
It's just
you just hear what you want to hear. Yeah. Yeah. It took me a long time to figure out that it was very specific. Yeah. And it's easier now because Shred's got a book out, and there's a lot of people documenting.
This is a new edition. You've got it there?
Yeah. Commercial.
Yeah, let's get it in there. So this lays out the specific count for each of the vinyasas in the.
Yeah, it's got all the postures and the counts and pictures of Shrat. Cool. Yeah. So in some ways, as traditional practitioners, it's easy for us to all agree. If we're students of Shrat, we have this resource. We can all say, okay, this is the way it is.
This is it.
Yeah. That makes it easy in some ways. It's a system.
I suppose. One of the things that, so we can see how you can see the benefits in the traditional approach. Can you see any limitations looking objectively at it?
Sure. I think, it's serious. It's a serious practice. So it's not going to be for people that don't want to do yoga every day or don't want their lives to change.
It's a commitment, isn't it? It's quite a commitment.
It's a huge commitment, and to me, that's the point of it. You know, it elicits change.
Yeah.
But I think that takes. Not everybody nowadays. Yoga is very popular, and there's a lot of different levels to it, and not everybody that does it wants the changes that come with it. But this practice is, you know, there's yamas and niyamas. You're supposed to change your life, your whole life around to do the practice. And people, I think a lot of people, when they hear yoga, that's not the picture they have in mind, right? They have a body type or, you know, an activity in mind. And so I think it's a bit heavy for some people. I think it could be done for everybody, but it's not for everybody. Not everyone's interested. But you hear, you know, celebrities are doing it, or this person or that, and you
15-day yoga program, with nutrition and weight loss and everything.
Yeah, and so people sometimes walk into the class not understanding that, and you know, they're just not going to want to do that. But,
so not for everybody, and I suppose one of the things I'm thinking about is that one of the criticisms leveled at maybe a more traditional approach revolves around potential for injury, and that by going into things quickly, shall we say, that maybe we're not mindful enough of our knees or a particular other body part.
Yeah.
How do you set up good practice to avoid that sort of thing happening within the framework of a traditional approach?
Well, you know, you can't isolate aspects of a traditional approach. So you can't say the vinyasa count is only that's the way to do it. Because remember, if we're doing traditional, we're also stopping at poses.
Yes.
And so that protects us in some ways. We wait for the body to change. It's great if people come and they're learning how to do yoga from the beginning with Ashtanga, and especially Mysore style.
Yeah.
So I think Mysore style is the way that Ashtanga is done, actually. I think that they're virtually the same.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's lead class that is usually the way people are.
Because people are going further than they would be going in the Mysore practice.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And then you can't individually prescribe it the same way, you know? When people come in for a Mysore practice, I can watch them and I can say, okay, today that, you know, stop there. And I can watch somebody else and say, here's another pose. And I can meet people's needs that way and make sure they're safe. But a lead class, it's just impossible.
So what happens at lead class at your studio? Is there a Friday lead class?
Yeah, there's a Friday lead class.
And do people stop where they would normally stop?
I do everything I do. I just base it on the way that I've been taught by Shrat.
Yeah.
So we just try to do it the exact same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody's doing the same approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's a safe way to do it. I think it's a really great way, but it is physical.
Yeah.
And so of course issues are going to come up.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you do it for years and years. Of course. You know, things come up in the body, but I think that would be the same with anything. And having again come from a non-traditional approach originally too, I would say I saw just as many problems that way as well. And it comes down more to a lot of the time to us, you know, pushing or making bad decisions.
Yeah, of course. Yes,
and maybe sometimes a teacher pushing or something.
Yeah. And if we're thinking about going back, we've got the breath, we've got the certain amount of key things that we're doing in the postures, and each posture that makes that particular posture.
Conditions of the pose.
Conditions of the pose, yeah. Are there other things that you feel maybe people start wavering on, or that you, when you're working with a big number of people, that you've seen crop up that, okay, these are common areas where people are deviating from what they need to be doing? I'm avoiding the word mistakes.
Yeah. Well, you know, before we were talking about kind of the biomechanical laziness, you know, the automatic quality that comes into that. I think that's something that we always have to be vigilant for. And then a teacher can help that way. If the teacher can stay vigilant enough and keep watching even experienced students, we can start to spot where we start to, you know, we kind of round the corners down, and sometimes those corners are pretty important to stability or structure, and so the issues will start to pop up. You know, because we're all doing the same thing, it makes it fairly simple though, because it's usually the same issues. You know, all the time.
They crop up.
As a teacher, I see the same stuff coming all the time. But I would say we all regardless of level, seem to suffer from those things. Like it just happens at some point. Yeah, and I would say that, in terms of the physicality of the practice, but then I think we also, as people that are inside of a tradition or trying to pass on a tradition, we have to be careful about becoming too closed.
Yeah.
It's like the finger in the moon.
Yeah.
We start staring at the finger, and it's or Freud called small differences. When everyone's kind of in agreement generally, you're comfortable enough to start having these little disputes about little things.
The big stuff's out the way.
Yeah. And so it can become a lot of flag waving, or which is so obviously not the point of our practice either. So we have to keep trying to stay open to what the practice is bringing us, instead of getting too focused on the technique. Ultimately the technique is empty.
Yeah.
The technique is just directing us to something. There's nothing inside of asana itself, right? It's just bringing us to a place.
Yeah.
And there's nothing inside of vinyasa. All this information is just to carry us somewhere. So, but we get all hung up on.
We do, I suppose, don't we? And my next thing was to be directing you towards technique. Because, I've felt profound differences sometimes when a teacher has said to me, if you just do this, it'll make life so much easier. And you think, well, I've been struggling for like 2-3 months, doing this, which is a learning process in itself.
Yeah.
But I would probably have continued to be doing the same struggling if I hadn't had that like intervention or guidance towards a certain thing. And I mean, I can tell from your videos, like the Learn to Float, there's a lot of technique in there, isn't there? There's a lot of thought about what's going on in the body, what we're doing with the hands, what we're doing with the rib cage. So there's an element of that in there.
There's a way to do it.
There's a way to do things.
Yeah. I think, again, common injuries. There's, if you're trying to do something extreme like that, like trying to do the straight leg lifts again and again, and if you're just kind of pushing through it and you're not using technique, then you're going to end up injuring yourself. And so there's a right way. It never seems that mysterious, about how to do it. It's just usually hard. And then I guess the longer we practice, the more refined we get in the application of the technique.
Sometimes you stumble across something, don't you? One day, and you think, oh my God, that felt so nice.
Feels like it's been a while
How
since
did I do that?
It all just seems hard right now.
Now it feels hard in this heat, this beautiful heat.
It's just like the effort of the practice. It's part of it is just settling into it. It's just like, oh, this is hard. Here I am doing this.
Let's do it anyway.
Here's my leg behind my head again.
How have you approached asanas that have been particularly challenging for you? What way do you approach them? Do you repeat them? Do you just do it once and then that's where you stop, or do you do stuff outside of the practice what do you do?
So I repeat them. I usually, the pose that I'm working on, I'll repeat 3 times. Usually the last pose, And I try not to get too obsessed about it inside of the practice itself. So just a few times. And then outside of the practice, I might do other things too, like later in the day, depending on what it is. Sometimes it'll be just to treat the soreness that comes up while I'm working on it,
right.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to do, anything you want to do later in the day is whatever, what you do, as long as you can come back the next day and try again. But I do watch people get, bloody elbows with forearm balance. They get so obsessed.
They're gonna get it.
They're just so focused. That can work against us, right? Ashtangis can get very focused. And then they'll just try it 100 times until you say, like, stop. And their elbows will be bleeding. And it's so terrible. So I've heard Shrat say, just try it 3 times or 5 times. He sets a limit, and so you don't get carried away. And
that would be, do you think there's a maximum number of postures that you can be working on at any one time that would then disrupt the flow?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you don't want to turn into a workshop, usually, the one that you're working on would be the one that you stop at. you might need multiple tries for a while, like say Kapotasana. Sometimes
Yeah.
people need to do that a couple times each day
Yeah.
before they can get it, or they'll try it a couple times before they get assisted.
Yeah.
And that's always with the objective of being able to eventually do it once unassisted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you had a bunch of poses in your practice that you needed to do a lot of times, it would probably mean you've gone too far.
Yeah.
And you got to be careful when you get to that spot, because it's probably a dangerous place to be.
Something I've noticed in my own practice maybe is these sort of pseudo preparation breaths, extra breaths while I'm stealing myself ready to do something.
Yeah.
Have we got to sort of minimize those, I imagine?
I think that's what that's the ideal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of energy in those, when you can not do them.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no difference.
Yeah.
You're pretty sure you're convinced
you
need to do that whole
Yeah.
like leg thing. So before you put your leg behind your head, you need to do all this stuff. And then you put it behind your head, it's hard. And then one day you decide, screw it, you're just going to put it right behind your head. It's about the same level of hard, right? You just didn't do all that other stuff.
Beforehand.
So as a person who also falls prey to all those little preparations, then I think we want to get rid of them, but it's difficult for sure. I know that you can, I can almost do the primary series vinyasa correctly, almost, and I don't have too much fudging around.
Yeah.
And intermediate, more or less, I can, and then I get to third and it all falls apart.
It's pretty tough practice, third, isn't it? Because there's a lot of arm balances, one after the other, isn't it? It's not just taking an individual one and saying, okay, I can do that. It's the cumulative effect of maybe 4 or 5 arm balances, one after the other, coming up and out.
It's true. On their own, they're not so bad. But the vinyasa between them and stuff, trying to do that it's very hard. But I know it can be done. I've seen people do it.
Yeah.
But for me, at this point, I need to do another 1,000 times or something, But I felt that way about primary once.
Yeah.
And I felt that way about intermediate. So I'm just assuming, unless I get too old, first, that I'll feel that way about advanced day one day.
How do you see your practice changing as you get older? Do you even think about that, or do you have a view of, okay, I'm going to do this for X number more years, and then I'm going to slowly ease back? Or
well, I like practice. I like the physical side of it, so I hope I can keep doing it, and I intend on staying with that as much as I can. So I'm not thinking about pulling back yet. So I don't know, but I definitely feel there's a difference. Even between 30 and 40, there's a big difference. So I'm not really looking forward to 50 so much, but I don't know. In another sense, I'm physically I'm more flexible and I'm stronger now than I was back then. I just have less energy overall, I would say.
And did you come from a bulkier background when you came into what did you do before yoga?
When I was a kid, I did judo and I wrestled and stuff, but I had a long period of inactivity.
Computer game type inactivity?
Yeah, whatever.
That sort of stuff.
The lost years.
The lost years.
Yeah, between maybe like 14 and 27.
That was a lot of lost years there somewhere.
Yeah, I remember some of them. I remember they were fun, but I didn't really do much. So
I suppose there's some you don't remember at all.
Some of them were good. I think I had a lot of body types in that time. I was like kind of heavy set, and I was thinner as well at times. But I think I've always had like bigger shoulders and
your underlying bone structure is very solid, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. I don't know if that's from judo or what. Yeah.
And have we got time to tease out of you a few? Going back to, I'm going to keep on like a dog on your sleeve about technique. Is there anything that you found over the years that a few little tidbits that really you found have helped the students to make things a little bit more comfortable for them? Maybe it's the placement of the hands in certain postures, or that sort of thing.
Well, there's absolutely alignment principles at play. Okay. So
Let's hear 'em.
Yeah.
We've got all afternoon.
Akem. What I see a lot of the time is it's the way our mind works is that we're doing a certain pose, and so all of our awareness goes into a certain direction, and we kind of forget about everything that's behind us. But it seems to me now, the way I'm thinking is that the whole body is energized in the practice, and that a lot of the time what we're trying to do is distribute work, so it doesn't seem like there's ever a part of us that's totally flaccid, and there's never a part that's totally clenched. We're trying to figure out how to get supporting muscles to work underneath the major muscles, and just make the whole thing a bit more filled with ease. Even though sometimes that's not an easy pose, like any of those arm balances and stuff. It's not like you're relaxing, but you want to feel like everything is working towards holding that pose, and I think that's a good way of keeping safe and making it much more balanced as well. And then simple things too, like, there's like our main muscle groups that take over. So upper trapezius are always...
They always seem to be, they're tight on so many people, aren't they?
Yeah.
Being a body worker, I see them all the time, and I'm thinking, how is this happening? We're meant to be softening the body, and here we are with these rock... I know, we're bringing it a lot from work and that sort of stuff as well, but I can, even with myself, and I should know better, I can feel it tightening up sometimes.
Yeah, well, your work too is...
So how do we keep it soft?
Keep
it
out
of the traps.
I think it's like supporting muscles, and it's going to depend on the postures that we're doing as well. But we have to be aware all the time that our body, the big muscles are trying to be helpful, and so the upper trapezius are always like, I got it, I'll do it.
Exactly, for anything and everything, they just jump in.
And so we've got to sort of educate ourselves, maybe off the mat too, about how to at least share the work a little bit more. So I always find, when I'm lifting my arms up, I always want to externally rotate. When I'm in upward dog, I'm always very careful, especially because I have big traps too. So I keep trying to sort of starve them. And make the other muscles work as well. And same with like glutes. Glutes want to do a lot all the time. So I'm trying to get them to release and make some of the muscles that don't want to work, like the inner thighs. And
there was quite a bit in your video, Learn to Float, about when you're setting up for the first float back, then to do with creating a horseshoe.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think a lot of the time when we're lifting from our hips. But, you have to be aware that the only thing that's lifting you is your arms and your hands. So first you have to keep your hands flat. That's a really big deal. And then you need to keep resisting away from the floor when you're lifting up. So we don't want to ever sink into the arms. So we know this whole like closed shoulder joint thing about keeping the arm in the socket, but actually we never want to like jam down. Even, ekam, we know when we're lifting our arm up, we want to reach. But it's the same with arm balancing too. We want to reach and keep pushing like that. And what I've found is you get this real like a buoyant feeling when you can do that, when you can lift and push instead of sink into the support of the arms. And then it's kind of in a natural shape too, right?
Yes, exactly. I was having a mess with it the other day, and it was like, this is going to take some getting used to.
It's a weird one, because your back's so round, but it's only for a split second to tip your weight forward to get your hips over your shoulders. Once the hips are over the shoulders, then the work changes. But I think we're rounding the upper back to maybe even distribute the weight onto the other side of our fulcrum to tip the weight forward to lift the feet up. It's easier for us, right, for people with shoulders, and it's harder for like heavier hips.
Something I've noticed with people doing Bujapidasana, that inner side of the hand starts to lift. The hand becomes more like this, doesn't it, rather than completely flat.
It's really hard to keep your hand
what
flat.
Is happening there? What can we do to... Is there any cues for keeping that activation, keep those hands down?
You'd think if your elbows came out, your palms would go down, but it's not true. When the elbows come out, the weight tips to the outside of the wrist or the hand, and so that's lifting through the inner palm. So you really have to track your elbows, if not over the wrist, at least in the same plane as the wrist. So, for Bujapidasana, it's very difficult to just tip forward with the elbows over the wrist.
Yes, it's like the elbows...
They have to go back. Back is okay, I think, just to a point. But out isn't okay. Yeah, out is what's going to lift there. And I guess as well, again, it's the upper trapezius. Whenever they seem to engage, we go into internal rotation and the insides of the palms lift.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like I keep trying to find, if it's my feet on the floor, I want to push through my feet. If it's my hands on the floor, I want to push through the hands. If my hands and my feet are on the floor, I try to actively press down through them all the time. In the same idea of sharing the work, instead of just kind of, okay, my hand is on the ground. I'm actually, if my hand's on the ground, it's doing something.
You're doing something with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I feel, you can kind of feel a kinetic chain, in your body. You can feel the connection of work. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to talk about it, eh?
Yeah, I mean, it's doing and just to talk about it without doing and without people listening and doing at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's little insights that they can now play with and see what they think.
Yeah.
Thanks, David, for sharing all this stuff with us.
Oh, those are good questions.
It's a great pleasure
fun.
to talk to you.
Thanks,
so
Stu.
much. Cheers.
Namaste.
Cool.